Okay, so let's jump right in. When we think about Israel, our minds usually go to its external conflicts. But today, we're going to turn the lens inward. We're going to explore the really deep, complex, and honestly, often overlooked fractures within Israeli society. The constant tug-of-war between the nation's founding ideal and its much more complicated reality.
It seems like such a simple question, doesn't it? But the answer, well, the answer is at the very heart of so many of the country's internal struggles. As we're about to see, just trying to define Israeli reveals a nation really grappling with the core of its own identity.
So, the first thing you've got to wrap your head around is that this idea of a single, uniform Israeli Jew, it's basically a myth. I mean, look at this data. It just completely shatters that idea. The largest Jewish group, at almost 45%, isn't from Europe. They're Mizrahi Jews, from Arab and Middle Eastern countries. This internal diversity is a huge source of the tensions we're going to unpack. To really get a handle on the fractures in the present, we first have to go back and understand the powerful, single-minded vision that the state was built on in the first place.
This was the blueprint, you know? Zionism laid out the state's main purpose, to be a national home for the Jewish people, a place where they could be safe and sovereign. But this laser-focused vision immediately brings up a couple of massive questions. First, what about the non-Jewish people who are already living there? And second, what about the Jews who didn't quite fit the European mold of the state's founders?
And that brings us to the reality. The first major crack in that simple Zionist ideal came from right inside Israel's own borders, with a population that was there all along. 21%. I mean, just let that sink in. That's more than 1 out of every 5 citizens. These are the descendants of the Palestinians, about 160,000 of them, who didn't flee or weren't expelled during the 1948 war. They stayed in their homes and suddenly woke up as a minority in a brand new country.
And here you can see their fundamental predicament. On paper, they have Israeli citizenship, but in practice, they face these huge systemic hurdles. In school, their own history is pushed to the margins. For jobs, military service is often a must-have, but most of them don't serve. In politics, yeah, they can form parties, but the whole system is built to prioritize a Jewish identity. It's a citizenship that's constantly being contested.
So this leads us to a really important concept that a lot of academics use: ethnocracy. See, unlike a liberal democracy where all citizens are supposed to be equal, an ethnocracy is a system where the state is openly designed to serve the interests of one specific ethnic group, in this case, Jewish Israelis, and that, by definition, creates a hierarchy.
This quote, I mean, it's just stunning. It's from Israel's very first Minister of Justice. And it just lays bare the early state's attitude. The Palestinians who stayed weren't seen as fellow citizens by right. They were seen as a defeated enemy whose loyalty was automatically suspect and had to be proven. Their citizenship wasn't a right, it was a privilege that was granted to them.
You can really think about the journey of Palestinian citizens inside Israel as a story in 3 parts. It kicked off with almost 20 years of being under direct military control. Then, that gave way to a period of political awakening, and eventually, that evolved into a more organized fight for civil rights from within the Israeli system. This event is just a deep, painful scar from that era of military rule. What happened was, an Israeli officer gave a shoot-to-kill order for anyone breaking a brand new curfew. But workers coming home from the fields had no idea the curfew had been changed. They were shot and killed. The massacre caused such a public outcry, even among some Jewish Israelis, that it became a key reason military rule was eventually lifted. So if that first era was defined by military rule, the next one was defined by moments like this. Land Day was the first time Palestinian citizens organized a huge nationwide protest to really assert their rights and their connection to their land. It's now commemorated every year, and it symbolizes their ongoing struggle for their identity and against discrimination.
But the Palestinian minority wasn't the only challenge to this ideal of a unified nation. A really deep fracture also opened up from inside the Jewish population itself, between the people who founded the state and the people who were brought in to fill it.
Okay, so let's look at those numbers again. We see the Mizrahim, Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, are the biggest community. But despite that,
Israel's early power structure, its elite, was almost completely dominated by Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, who often looked at their Mizrahi brothers and sisters with deep suspicion.
This is a direct quote from David Ben-Gurion, the founding father of Israel. He saw Mizrahi Jews as a demographic necessity. I mean, they needed Jewish bodies to build the state. But he also saw them as culturally backward. They were treated like a project, something to be fixed and civilized into the modern European-style nation he wanted to build.
And this thinking was everywhere among the ruling class, and it had real, devastating effects. Mizrahi immigrants were often stuck in horrible transit camps, they faced discrimination in pretty much every part of society, and their own rich culture, which was influenced by their Arab heritage, was actively suppressed to make way for a European one. They were, for all intents and purposes, second-class Jews.
So you have these two massive tensions, one with the Palestinian minority, one within the Jewish majority, just simmering under the surface. It was really only a matter of time. And by the 1990s, this conflict between Israel's ideal and its reality just erupted into a full-blown battle for the very soul of the nation. So in the midst of all the optimism of the Oslo Peace Accords in the 90s, this new idea starts to bubble up, mostly from academics, artists, and minority groups. It was called post-Zionism. The argument went something like this. Okay, the original Zionist project is done. The state exists. Now it's time for Israel to grow up and evolve, from an ethnic fortress into a truly liberal, multicultural democracy for all its citizens, and to finally become a normal part of the Middle East, not a European outpost.
And when you put these two visions side by side, the clash it's crystal clear. Post-Zionism was pushing for diversity and integrating with the region, but that sparked this huge backlash from a counter-movement, often called neo-Zionism, and they wanted to double down on Jewish homogeneity, on self-reliance, and on the state's original ethnic nationalist ideas.
But here's the thing. This whole ideological fight didn't happen in a vacuum. When the Second Intifada exploded in the year 2000, the entire national mood just changed on a dime. That optimistic vision of post-Zionism, it basically crumbled under the weight of all the violence. Security became the only thing that mattered, and that pendulum swung hard back towards the tougher, more uncompromising vision of neo-Zionism.
And that's what leaves us here, with this fundamental, unanswered question that Israel is still wrestling with every single day. It's the question that's born from this clash between its powerful founding ideals and its messy, diverse, complicated reality. Can a state define itself by one ethnicity and still be a real democracy for the 21% of its citizens who aren't part of that group? That is the challenge sitting right at the heart of modern Israel.